I want to tell you about another podcast we think you'll love. Pod Save the UK is a weekly political podcast hosted by comedian Nish Kumar and journalist Coco Khan. Each week, Nish and Coco are joined by politicians, subject experts and famous friends to unpick the week in politics and, crucially, discuss what it all means for you. Not content to just talk about the problems the country's facing, Pod Save the UK is out to find solutions, action and a little bit of hope with a lot of humour. The stellar list of recent guests includes me, Beth Rigby, and our own Jess Phillips, as well as SNP leader Humza Yousaf, Labour MP Nadia Whittome and even pop star turned campaigner Will Young. Follow Pod Save the UK now wherever you're listening to this. New episodes are out every Thursday and it's an absolute blast. Give it a go. Hello and welcome to an electoral dysfunction. We're recording this on Friday morning as the local election results come in. I'm in Sky's Westminster studio and it is absolutely jam-packed out there, so I'm glad to hide in here. There's loads of people who've been working overnight. They're crunching the numbers. There's a mountain of chocolate. And Ruth, you'll be delighted to know there is a whole fridge full of Diet Coke.
Yes, why am I not there?
I'm going to be here all weekend as the results are coming in. So it's the beginning of a 48-hour election marathon, and I like nothing more than that. Now, Jess, where are you and what time did you go to bed?
I went to bed at about 3 a.m. and I was doing various media things until about 2, of which my son came in from a nightclub with loads of his mates halfway through one of them. So yeah, I've not had much sleep.
Ruth, no elections in Scotland, but there's been a lot going on following the resignation of the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, which you, of course, predicted.
I'm like an angel of death, Beth. You know, I can tell you who's gonna get axed, who's gonna have to walk, all the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, you guys all think that elections and politics is exciting where you are, and then Scottish politics just says, hold my beer. So yeah, it's all going off up here.
We've got some of your questions. Some of you dysfunctionals were up late or awake early sending us stuff. So thank you for that. You can WhatsApp voice note us on 07934 200 444. The email is electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. It's our favourite bit, getting stuff from you guys. So please keep it coming. Now, what can we say? The government is undoubtedly having an electoral dysfunction this morning. It's about 11 a.m. on Friday. The Tories have had a very bad night. They're facing their worst possible local election results in 40 years. They lost the Blackpool by-election with a huge 26-point swing to Labour. It's one of the biggest swings in post-war electoral history. And someone from Labour was very quick to phone me to say that 4 out of the 5 biggest ever swings from Tories to Labour in by-elections have happened in the past year. So take that in. Then the Conservative Party in Blackpool avoided being beaten into third place only by 117 votes. How are they going to be feeling at Tory HQ this morning, Ruth?
I think, you know, that is a terrible result. It's not just a beating, it's an absolute pasting. I actually weirdly think that quite a lot of heart will be taken from the fact that Reform didn't vault over the Tories, even if it was only by 100 votes, just because we're kind of in 2015 territory where at the general UKIP won 4 million votes but only got 1 seat over the line, and they were second in like 120 seats or something. The fact that so far, at the time at which we're talking, they've got not a single councillor returned. The Green Party, for example, has done much better than them and are not getting half the airtime. And independents have done really well. I just think that there's quite a lot of work that Reform probably needs to do to get their campaigning outfit ready to get their votes in the right places at the right time. And at the moment, we haven't quite seen that.
Labour, they have made gains in Redditch, Thurrock, Hartlepool, Rushmore in Hampshire for the Conservatives, losing that. Someone told me this morning, another Labour source in my ear, pointed out that that's where the British Army is based. So they were making the argument that when Rishi Sunak goes big on defence and then the home of the British Army votes Labour, that is not a dividing line. There's a bit of Labour spin. You can knock that down as you wish. Jess, it is a great result for Labour, absolutely no doubt. There are a few niggles here because the Tories look on course to lose potentially half the seats that they are fighting, but Labour are not picking up all of those seats. They're doing well, but they're moving to other parties. What are you thinking about the Labour performance at the moment?
I mean, I think that the Labour Party, to go to Ruth's point about whether reform, can pick up massive vote share but can't pick up any seats, I think that the Labour campaign strategy has been to focus on geographical areas they need to make progress. And by that metric, when you're looking at places like Rushmore, which I've got to say, I wasn't that familiar with Rushmore until this morning. When you're looking at places like Redditch, Stevenage, all of these places are key seat campaign battlegrounds for the Labour Party. Hartlepool, I think they probably will sit back and feel pretty good about it. Also, I just want to make a massive plea to the sort of general conversation about this, is that there is differential voting in local elections and national elections. There is always a differential between how people go in a general election and how people go in a local election. There is some issues with regards to independents and Greens that the Labour Party is going to have to wake up and face tomorrow morning, Monday morning, whenever it is. There is some results in places, Labour heartlands, where they maintain the council, of course, in places like Newcastle, where the Greens are making strides. I very much expect, as the mayoral votes come in, that in places like Birmingham, Bradford, places with high Muslim populations, as we've seen overnight in Oldham, that the Labour Party will have some questions that they have to, and some searching to do themselves. However, you cannot spin it any other way than this is a good night for the Labour Party.
It's always fatal for people like me, people reporting on this, to suddenly start making massive proclamations at midday on a Friday, only to look like a right tit by midnight on Saturday. Labour did lose control of Oldham, and that does seem to be about Gaza and the unhappiness. Are you seeing an effect on the ground? Do you think that might become a theme of these elections?
Yes, I am seeing an effect on the ground, and anybody who tells you otherwise is lying. There is undoubtedly an effect. I think Pat McFadden took to the airways this morning to say that there was an effect. So I'm not even speaking out of turn. I represent a very diverse seat with a large number of Muslim voters. And this was, inevitably going to be part of the story, the issue of Gaza.
The result that's come in early that I was probably most interested in was the result in Redditch, because it's such a bellwether seat. So the council seat there is pretty close to the boundaries for the constituency seat, and that's a bellwether seat. So that was Conservative from 2010 up to 2019, still being held by a Conservative. That's going to be one that's going to be defended. But before that, Jackie Smith, the first female Home Secretary for Labour, she took it when it became that seat on those boundaries back in 1997 and held it right up there. So before 97, when it was still Mid-Worcestershire, that was a Tory seat. So it generally, the last 30 years, it's gone with whoever the Prime Minister is. It's gone with who makes the government, even in minorities. So it's a proper, true bellwether in the American sense of the word. And, that was a pretty resounding result. Not just what we lost, but that was an area where actually Labour did stack up some of the votes. So you're absolutely right, Beth, in terms of the council losses that we're seeing so far, into the hundreds now for the Tories. But proportionally, Labour only picking up about half of the seats that the Tories are losing in terms of the results that are coming in. And while that's not a disaster for Labour, I mean, there's nothing that says this isn't a good night for Labour. This is a very good night for Labour. It just leaves a question mark about Keir Starmer's ability to enthuse people and get them over the line. But the Labour Party narrative and argument has very strongly been, we're not about vote share here. We're about where these votes lie. We're about actually, it's not just how many votes, it's constituencies, not just of people, but constituencies of place, because that's what wins elections. And if that's a strategy,
also, that's working. What people think of themselves as. People don't think of themselves as like part of the national vote share. The read across is delicious. I get it. And we all want to go, what does this mean for the general election rather than what does this mean for drop curbs in my local area? However, we should be really careful of the read across because, it doesn't stack up on the ground when you're actually fighting those seats often. Can I just say we should do an electoral dysfunction tour of all the places like that? Like go and see all the places that have had like a woman or a man named after them, like Mondeo Man.
Mid-Worcester women. Yeah, all of that.
Yeah, Worcester woman. We should go to all those apparently completely swingy places and try and see how actually
We can
whether
call it
those
the
things were
Electoral
right or not.
Dysfunction Swingers Tour. Monday, oh man, throw us your keys.
Actually, this is what someone said to me about it this morning, about these seats where they are picking up votes. They said it's not just the Tories losing, this is a Labour insider, it's us winning Rushmore, Redditch. Whoever wins Redditch wins the country, Thurrock and Hartlepool. We're winning every type of seat, the red wall and the blue wall, right? So that's where they are on Redditch. But Harlow has
I was about to say, but you went to Harlow with Keir Starmer and he sat down and he told you, we need to win in Harlow if we're going to win. And then they didn't. And so it is a mixed bag.
You can elaborate on what Keir Starmer, how he seemed in Harlow. I watched your piece with him, and one thing I would say about Keir Starmer is he weighs every single word that comes out of his mouth, and I've never weighed one. So, but he did say, we need to win in places like Harlow.
Harlow is one of those seats that whoever won a general election for the past 40 years won Harlow at a general election. Thatcher didn't win it till 83. She didn't win it in 79. She won it in 83. Blair won it in 97. Goes back to Cameron in 2010. Rob Halfon, a very locally active MP, under boundary changes. I think he's got about 14,000 majority now. Under boundary changes, I think that the majority for the Tories goes up to about 16,000. I went up to the Harlow Football Club with Keir Starmer. It was very funny, actually, because he loves Arsenal.
I was watching him kind of G up the crowd, and we've all done it in front of you. You have like the paid and the unpaid that come along and hold placards, and you chat to them, and they're all on side, and it's a closed room, and you're trying to G them up and all the rest of it. And the person that I found him most like, actually, with the way that he talks and the way that he has that, like you say, he weighs every word, Jess, so he's quite considered. It slightly threw me back a bit to John Major.
But the thing is, the truth is, let me tell you a truth about Keir Starmer, that in real life, when he's not weighing every word, he actually riffs quite well. Recently, he told me to fuck off.
You need to explain that now. You need to explain how.
It was basically, I think Rishi Sunak had been up in the northeast, and I'd been talking to Julie Elliott, the member of Parliament in Sunderland, and she'd said that he didn't even allow the students at the university to take photos with him. He was being really, really controlled. And Keir had been up in the northeast, and it had been much more relaxed. Oh, and I'd been on the train with Rishi Sunak that week, and he'd been all hidden away in the carriage. I was walking through the lobbies with Keir Starmer, and I said, I'm starting to actually feel a little bit sorry for him. He seems to be having a terrible time. And Keir Starmer turned around to me and just said, "Oh, fuck off, Jess." And I was like, fair enough. I have to say, I'm okay with having a Prime Minister that weighs his words. I'm okay of going into an era where we look where there are people like me who can freestyle and be woman of the people and all that. But there has to be a weighing of words going on.
They're gutted about Harlow. It's because he's in the can on tape saying we have to win Harlow to win an election, and now the Tories can seize on this to weaponise it. The issue for Keir Starmer is that momentum of New Labour, it doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be borne out in terms of this kind of. And I'm not talking about not making the gains so they can argue that they are on course for an election victory in a majority. What I'm talking about is the kind of energy and enthusiasm for Labour that you saw on that New Labour wave that Blair rode into the 1997 election.
Now, bear in mind the era that Blair came in. was after an even longer period of Tory rule. And he was up against somebody, like quite grey, if not respectable, but quite grey. But also, it was the beginning of a multimedia world as well, that now it seems so old-fashioned to us, but it was shiny. It was a shiny time as well, and so you have to skin the cat you've got. Now, that all said, I think that the Blair comparison, it's sometimes it's difficult for me, but I understand completely why. It seems so parallel in lots of different ways, that's why people make it. That said, I think that the Labour Party does have an enthusiasm problem in the country, that it needs to tackle. However, I don't want it to tackle it with lies, spin, shine. I want it to tackle it with good, honest politics that talks about what people's actual lives are and what is realistically can be done, and then to just crack on with doing it.
I think that the Blair revisionism is quite revealing about what we want to believe. Because yeah, I think the point that Jess makes about the clash between sort of being staid, small c conservative, an old world versus the bright, shiny new world. It's true. It did. Even as somebody who was never interested in Blair, wasn't seduced by him. My first election voting was 1997. I never bought the hype. I never drank the Kool-Aid. But even I could see that the narrative that was being painted was your past versus your future. There was a modernity there and an opportunity about what Britain could be and the sort of country that it could be. And Blair is, for all his faults and his drawbacks, is and was a storyteller and understood the power of stories. I do think there is a world of difference in the skills sets that Blair and Starmer have, and that Starmer, for me, does need to go some more in order to be able to get past even what we're seeing today. So at the moment, the results that are coming in, the Tory party is losing just over half the number of council seats that it held. The Labour Party is winning less than half the council seats that the Tories are losing. Starmer needs to find an answer to that narrative that he's too boring for people to switch from one to the other.
Jess, actually, Ruth has reminded me of something you said a bit earlier on, that Labour are going to have an answer, you said, to kind of the rise of the Green or other independents. Like, what does that look like? What do you think they have to do?
I think he needs to now move on to how to change the country, and stop leaning on the fact that he changed the Labour Party. Do you know what I think they should do? Bit of mea culpa never gets a miss.
The Labour Party is only a vehicle for representative democracy, same way as the Tories, same way as Liberals, same as the SNP implied and all the rest of it, the Greens. It is only a vehicle to get stuff done, for decisions to be made, and whether those decisions benefit us or don't benefit us as a country, that's what people care about. It's how it impacts on their lives.
The other massive story, obviously, is going to be these mayors. There's been a huge focus on the two Conservative incumbents. That's Ben Houchen in Tees Valley, who won a whopping majority back in 2021. And then there's also Andy Street in the West Mids. This is the least surprising news of the morning for me, ladies, but background on Tees Mayor coming in. Labour sources now saying, unsurprisingly, they expect Houchen to win, but with a considerably reduced majority. They're not formally conceding they expect to lose. That's not surprising, is it, Ruth?
I think there would be a very heavy reckoning within the party if we lost Teesside. I think in terms of the unrest and the sort of the kind of rebels that want to move against Rishi Sunak and say that there's one more chance to get a different leader in to try and change the narrative around the Tories before a general election. If we lost one or other or both of Teesside and West Midlands, I think they would have a huge amount of fuel. One of the big things about elections is expectation management and getting it right. And the Tories, I think, have done really, really well with saying, if we hold both of these, then that's probably okay, in terms of they're touch and go, we're going to be working really hard and blah, blah, blah. And nobody been expecting anything other than quite big losses, and that been briefed well and done properly. And then at about 11:30 last night, some idiot somewhere in CCHQ briefed a journalist online that Susan Hall was going to win London. And it went mad. Like, Twitter went mad, social media went mad, and then suddenly this hair was set running that we were going to get over the line. Now, I have no idea. There is a real danger to Rishi Sunak that, one, if it's really close, he will get roasted by the party because no resource was really put in. CCHQ didn't do a huge amount behind them. And if it was winnable and we didn't win it, he will get absolutely hauled over the coals. If for whatever reason it's true and we get over the line there, I mean, I think the narrative will very soon and very strongly become that the 3 mayoral returns, if that's what there is, managed to get there in spite of the Prime Minister rather than because of being badged as a Tory.
Are you saying that if they win it, it hurts him because it's despite of him? I would say it gives him a little bit of breathing space, no?
In Teesside and the West Midlands, I mean, the party put a lot of resource in there. Now, the 2 candidates themselves featured very heavily on running on their own records and distancing themselves from the Prime Minister. But I think the party will absolutely will swallow that as that was what needed to be done to hold the seats. Happy days. And that's probably going to be a mitigating factor for the danger against Rishi Sunak. I think if Susan Hall gets very close or wins, I think all hell is going to erupt within the party because Rishi Sunak, A, gave up on a place that was winnable if we get close but fail, or if we get across the line, the idea that he didn't know about it, or that, again, his touch for politics and for campaigning and stuff is failing him, that he doesn't get the kind of most important part or the most important numbers in politics, which are the number of voters that you get. He's good at the numbers in the Treasury. He's featured on that for a long time. But what does he actually know about campaigning? Being dropped in to Richmond, safe seat in Yorkshire, had the arm of William Hague around him, who was the outgoing and beloved MP. Like, what does he actually know about fighting tough races? And this is going to be a tough election. So I don't think, even if there's some quite good results here, that Rishi Sunak is out of danger this week.
While the Labour Party are kind of now really managing down expectations on Tees Valley, simply don't know on West Mids. But Jess, like, you're there, you're pounding the streets, you and Danny are out, your 15-year-old. I don't know how you've managed to get, honestly, you must be the best mother ever to get a 15-year out on the campaign trail. I mean, I hope you paid him.
I bought him a pizza.
There you go.
I mean,
Domino's. They'll do anything for a Domino's. But look, like, how was it on the ground? And how much do you think the kind of combination of the Birmingham Council, the near bankruptcy, lifting council tax bills, and the situation in Gaza, have those 2 things combined to basically take it out of Labour's grasp? Do you think? You don't think they're going to get it, although it is too close to call at the moment?
I mean, it is absolutely too close to call it. And regardless, and let's have a small insight here into the fact that when politicians speak to journalists, I also spoke to Beth last night, and I'm saying exactly what I said to her in private, is that this is it is an unusual area in that it has some very, very, very red wall, naturally socially conservative areas. It has some absolutely true blue Tory, like the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, and there's deers in the park sort of thing, and then a massive metropolitan area in Birmingham. So it has no real political identity anyway, regardless of the times that it sits in, and that anyone saying that they could tell how it was going to go in different places was just lying, because I'm putting my finger in the air in Birmingham. So what I can tell you is, right, so you asked me a direct question about whether the council and Gaza came up. Not one person mentioned the council to me.
That's interesting, because the reason I said that was people within Labour were saying to me yesterday the issues around the council they think are going to depress the vote in the centre, in the metropolitan areas for Labour.
It might be a kind of weirdly a projection from us, because almost everything that I've seen that's come out from Andy Street in the last sort of week has all been about how he's going to do everything, and he's got a tagline, and it will cost you no extra pennies. Like, he's basically saying, like, nothing that I'm going to do is going to cost you extra money. So it might just be that whoever it is that you spoke to from Labour was wavering that we knew something that they didn't. And it certainly has been from the Andy Street campaign and the literature that I've seen and the broadcasts that I've seen from them, that they are making sure that nobody thinks that anything he says he's going to go on and do is going to cost a single penny more. And that's entirely related to the fact that council tax is going up so much within Birmingham.
I have to say that the reason that the vote turnout will in Birmingham, I imagine, be very low, and it was put to me on Radio 4 last night at 2 a.m. in the morning that Labour should be enthusing people to get out, and genuinely it is more meh than mayor. Nobody gives a shit that we've got a mayor in Birmingham. It means absolutely, I cannot stress this enough, fuck all to any of us. You know, on a scale in Birmingham, I'm probably top 10 of politically engaged people in Birmingham. I do not know what Andy Street does. I don't know what our mayor does. It's not even a criticism of him necessarily. I don't know what the West Midlands Combined Authority does or has any benefit on anyone where I live. In Birmingham, it doesn't control the police. It has nothing to do with health. Whereas Andy Burnham and in like TfL in London is like a beast of a thing. Like our mayor controls the buses badly. Like I have no the West Midlands model. We have our own police and crime commissioner as well. They don't even control that. It's so nothingy.
So Jess, your instinct is that you think Andy Street might have just done enough to hold on. That is not going to be mayor for Rishi Sunak. That's going to be major. That is going to be great for him.
Is it?
Do you not think it is?
I just think, you managed to hold a seat. You managed to hold a seat by a massively reduced majority in an area where Gaza was the issue, not you.
Well, look, let's pause there. Coming up, more of your messages and questions, and we're going to talk about what's been going on in Scotland. Welcome back. We have had emails and voice notes in from you overnight, so thank you for that. I just want to ask you about this email from Martin, and Ruth, I'm going to ask you about this. Martin asks us, has Sunak made a massive miscalculation in not holding the general election at the same time as the locals? The public seem, at least at 1 a.m. when I'm writing this, to be giving local Conservatives a drubbing for the actions of the parliamentary party. Does he now face going into a general election with a decimated and demoralised local base?
Well, look, I think you need a local base because that's your activists, and you need a tent pole in each community that are able to go out and say, you don't think that politicians are weird or mad or anything because you're just like me, because I go to, my kids go to the same school as you, we go to the same churches or whatever it is. So yes, you do. And local councillors can be a really big part of your foot soldier army. They really can be. And this does impact them. And one of the things that is really sad at elections that we always talk about the Highline sort of air war story, and actually there's people that lose their jobs and their income over this, and it's nothing to do with whether they've been any good at it. Nothing to do with it.
Absolutely.
And it is one of life's great unfairnesses, actually. But in terms of is Sunak right or not to go to the polls now rather than later, we won't know until he does, because it's very easy to project on that. But also, you guys in England, you're mad. Why do you do rolling local elections? Why do you do only a third and a third and a third? What is that nonsense? Be like Scotland.
In Birmingham, we don't.
Yeah, no, but sometimes only some councils are up at a time, and then sometimes in councils only some seats are up. It's mental. Don't do that. Just do everything same day, bargain basement. Have a cap on what you're allowed to spend. Get yourself out there. National messaging. Everybody knows that the election's happening. Turnout is higher. Just do it all at the one time. It's like geography when you had to do crop rotation, and that fallow year is like when you've got to plant a leguminous plant to try and get the nitrogen in your soil back. I don't get it. Just have a general election year in Scotland, have a Scottish parliamentary election year, same for Wales, and then just have a local government election year. Just do it.
Like the World Cup and the Euros. Have it at the 2-year interval. Yeah, 4 years. 2-year interval. I agree. I let's go to that. That would be much, much better for everybody's sleep.
It looks to me as well, Ruth, that on this question of a general election, and I know there was all this speculation and election fever around the idea of a June election, which many a wise Tory back here in Westminster would tell me was a lot more to do with party management than a Prime Minister actually wants election. If you put the fear into people that you might call an election early and they could suddenly be facing losing their seat, they might give you the benefit of the doubt and just let things play out. Ruth, as these results come in, are you still a very much autumn election kind of lady?
Well, to be honest, I think there's what he wants to do and what he's going to be forced to do. And I think in my head, I said for quite a long time that this was going to look as if it was going to be an autumn, sort of October, November election. And that's still what I think is odds on. I think there will be a view in Rishi Sunak's head that maybe he can or should stretch it out to January, but he'll get slaughtered for it, and the party will not hang together. And to be honest, discipline's pretty much broken down in the Tory party anyway.
I've just had this in. This is a very senior former Conservative cabinet minister saying to me, colleagues will be angry and panicky and discipline is totally shot. Cabinet collective responsibility. That's basically when they all have to agree with the government line, went some time ago. But the serious players want Sunak to own the loss and then they can rebuild after. What this source also says to me is that Sunak is very lucky that Boris Johnson is not in Parliament, that there isn't a prince over the water, which brings me neatly to another email from a listener. This is from Jeremy. You're going to like this, you two. What do you think about the requirement for voter ID, both the principle of having photographic ID when there isn't really any evidence of voter impersonation happening, and what constitutes a valid voter ID? Jeremy adds, if it had been a really tight vote and those without ID could have made a difference, what does it say about democracy? Voter ID, ladies.
It's a nonsense. I personally think that the voter ID thing is a nonsense. I feel like it was a dog whistle, and there is so little evidence of voter fraud being widespread enough for this to be an issue. The story about Boris Johnson forgetting his voter ID after being the Prime Minister who passed the legislation is both delicious, but I'm going to say, I suspect, a total attention seek and done on purpose.
Is a bit in character, but I mean, me and I think David Davis were probably the fiercest critics of this when it was brought in, because, you know, I was quoted in the newspapers as saying it was total bollocks, because that was my reaction, that it was designed to fix a problem that doesn't exist. There's not a huge amount of voter impersonation. It was brought in, you know, when we were in the kind of midst of COVID, and we had plenty of other problems to solve. We had loads of legislation we could have brought forward. And there was no evidence to back up that this was needed, because there wasn't any evidence to give.
It is something, though, isn't it, that Boris Johnson puts through the legislation, then goes to a polling booth without his ID. I mean, it's like a perfect Johnson story, isn't it?
It's almost too perfect.
Yes, why it seems fake. It's why it seems like he did it on purpose.
I don't know. I mean, he, as well as it being quite performance scatterbrainage, I mean, it is the sort of thing that would be for little people and not for him. So I'm not. So it might have been genuine.
Yeah. Either way, he's a dick.
Boris Johnson, just for the record, would say he's not a dick. As we were mulling Boris Johnson's ID, the Tees Valley result is in. It's in. Let me break. I wish I had a Sky News break kind of jingle. But I would have liked a little jingle for my Sky News break.
Do you want me to give you one? Do you want me to sing you a jingle?
Yes, jingle me.
Breaking news.
In the least surprising of breaking news, Ben Houchen, the Conservative, has held Tees Valley, but has got a reduced majority. Houchen coming in with 53.6%. Chris McEwen, the Labour candidate, behind on 41.3%. Lib Dems 5%. So what, they 12% ahead? So they've really reduced the gap. What do we think about that result? Who wants to go first?
Oh, we'd take that in a heartbeat. Got it over the line. He'll take it in a heartbeat. I mean, obviously, it's a big reduced majority, but he's over 50%. He's got a double figure majority. You know, that's the job done. Happy days. He will absolutely 100% take that.
The over 50% thing, I think, is probably the thing that you would focus on if you were Houchen, and the 41% and the gap closing massively is what you take if you were the Labour Party.
So in terms of the swing, and this is what Labour will be arguing on Tees Valley, the swing to Labour is 16.7%. Now, if they had that sort of swing in a general election in this area, they would be winning all of the seats in that area. Places like Redcar that turned Tory in 2019. So all the Tory seats in that area would be lost on that swing. And we should add just one health warning on this swing and how psephologists and the Tories might want to answer what Labour is saying about that 16.7 swing. There's actually a different electoral system in place compared to the last time this vote was run. There were 3 candidates, and there were 3 candidates instead of 2 this time. So maybe they're not strictly comparable, but Labour will be putting that line out nonetheless. So let's finish on Humza Yousaf's. He's announced that he's going to stand down as First Minister. He's resigned as leader of the SNP. Take us through what's happened since the beginning of this week.
So the last time we recorded the podcast, while we were doing the recording, Humza Yousaf kicked the Greens out of government, and he invited the 2 Green co-leaders in, and then he fired them, and he took away their ministerial cars and made them do a walk of shame in front of the cameras. And in terms of how bad a breakup that is, funnily enough, the 2 leaders, Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater, didn't take that very well, and they said, right, that's great. He also happened to fire them on the morning that First Minister's Questions is. So a couple of hours after he made the announcement, he had to stand up in Parliament, and Patrick Harvie had a question at First Minister's Questions, which was basically, who do you think's happiest today? Is it the leader of the Tory party? Is it Alex Salmond, the leader of the Alba party? Is it, Kate Forbes that you beat in the leadership election? And which of these people are you going to rely on for your majority now, matey? Then the leader of the Conservative Party said that he was going to have a vote of no confidence in Humza as the First Minister, which they had the votes for, because the Greens said that they would vote with that to bring him down, which wouldn't be legally binding, but there would be a huge kind of pressure on him to resign. The leader of the Labour Party, Anas Sarwar, said that he was going to have a vote of no confidence in the Scottish Government, which he probably wouldn't win because the Greens don't want to disrespect the time they spent in government. Part of their narrative is that they made a difference. But that would have been legally binding, and that would have sent Scotland to a Scottish election. I think the problem that the Tories and Labour had in trying to outdo each other in all these motions of no confidence is they didn't recognise what necessarily would happen next themselves. And, the former deputy leader, John Swinney, who's a very substantial figure, he had led the party some years ago, he's going to struggle to sell a changed narrative, but he's put himself forward, he's put himself in the leadership. The person that narrowly lost out to Humza, Kate Forbes, the former finance minister, she's not going to stand. She's rolled in, having done a deal, it looks like, with John Swinney. And in terms of the prospects for the Scottish Tories and Scottish Labour to land blows on the Scottish Government in Holyrood, it's going to be a lot harder to do it on that team than it was on Humza. So there is a bit of be careful what you wish for here.
When I have been talking to people within the SNP about this, there is a school of thought that says actually opposition parties, be careful what you wish for, because John Swinney is a grown-up, he'll stabilise, he might be a more effective leader than Humza Yousaf, who quite honestly struggled really to ever get a grip on the party and really begin to rebuild.
There is a big change narrative in Scotland in the same way as there's a change narrative in England and Wales for the general election that's coming up. So I think the SNP will lose substantial numbers of seats at the general election, irrespective of who their leader is. But in terms of the day-to-day of politics, of landing blows, of looking and sounding like you speak for the majority of Scots or that you're a sensible government, I think the problem Humza had was he seemed insubstantial, and he also felt, and a lot of his policy programme had moved quite far from where centrist Scotland was, and it looked as if the green tail was wagging the SNP dog, and he did look weak. And there is a real argument that having injured and bleeding Humza Yousaf in office, with all authority draining away from him for just for the next 6 months till we get to a general election, I mean, would have been much more in the interests for both Douglas Ross and the Tories and Anas Sarwar and Labour than having somebody that can come in, shore it up, show that they're pro-business, show that they speak to some of the priorities in terms of service delivery, get off the agenda of some of the culture war stuff, particularly on trans issues that we've had, and hate crime bills and all the rest of it. I mean, I think it's not going to save the SNP. They're still going to have a bad night, but I think the narrative changes hugely, and you know, doing Humza slowly would have been, I think, in both opposition parties' interests.
Yeah, I mean, that is such excellent analysis, Ruth, and I'm never ever going to say anything about Scotland without talking to you. But the only thing that I really noticed was that Alex Salmond was back on my television repeatedly throughout this debacle.
The reason that the Alex Salmond suddenly came back to life on our airwaves was that Ash Reagan had stood in the leadership race and lost out to Humza. She then defected to ALBA, which is Alex Salmond's party that he set up. Now, in a cruel twist of events for Humza Yousaf, when the Greens withdrew their support for him, the person with the casting vote as to whether or not he would hang on as First Minister and survive a confidence vote was none other than Ash Reagan. And Salmond then used that as a way to try and extract demands via Ash to Humza Yousaf and the SNP, and we all know the animosity between these two wings of the independence movement, between Salmond and the SNP. There's another woman in all of this, Kate Forbes. Now, she ran against Yousaf last time, losing with 48% of the vote, so it was a close run thing. There was talk about whether she would try and run against Swinney. Now, I think in the interest of unity of the SNP, she's decided not to, but she is definitely one to watch as a future leader.
Kate is smart. And one of the reasons that she's not running against John Swinney is because he is a far tougher proposition to run against in the SNP than Humza Yousaf is, because he's been around longer. There are more people with personal loyalty to him. He's done more in the party. He's got more stars on his chest, more ribbons on his chest than Humza by a country mile. It would be much harder.
Ruth, I did the leaders debate with all of them in 2023, and she was a seriously impressive woman. So I just, in terms of like the way in which she handles herself, the way in which she answers questions, etc., etc. So one to watch, but not for now.
You know, when people thought it was going to be a coronation of her, the viciousness and the vitriol for some of the religious beliefs that she's espoused, and the idea that she would be unable, because she's a member of the Free Church of Scotland, which is a very Presbyterian church, that she would be unable to distinguish between her personal faith and her political voting was something I've not seen projected onto any other candidate. I've not seen it projected onto Roman Catholic candidates in my time in politics. I've not seen it projected onto Humza, who one of the very first things he did when he became First Minister had his family do the kind of standing prayers and put out a photo of it to show, you know, how progressive it was. So the level of prejudice against her particular sect of Christianity has been really strong. She has made some personal statements that have been pretty strong about kids born out of wedlock, and she wouldn't have voted for gay marriage if she'd been in the Parliament. But on the very day that one of the most vicious columns came out, there was a vote in the Scottish Parliament on having buffer zones for abortion clinics. And she voted to have the zones. So in terms of voting in a way that protected the rights of people that were going to have an abortion, she did that, and she did that without a fanfare. She didn't say, look at me over here, I'm still thinking about running. That was just how she wanted to vote in that one. So I think there are a lot of questions to be asked in Scotland about some of the deep-seated prejudices we have.
So, ladies, what are you up to this weekend, Jess?
Because I have been electioneering for quite a long time and my husband's on some sort of crazy, like, climbing regime, my house is really dirty. And so I'm going to clean my house. I'm going to put on aprons and marigolds. I'm not. I'm not. I'm just going to do it. You know, I often clean out the dust with a pair of old knickers. But they're very good, old knickers for dusters. Yeah, so I'm going to clean my house this weekend. Not very glamorous, I'm afraid. As well as go to the count. I'll be at the West Midlands Mayor count, obviously.
All right, well, I might be there too, so I might see you there.
Oh, yay!
Ruth.
Yeah, so I've slightly overdone it this week. I've had a ton of stuff on, and I think I'm going to try and be very quiet and catch up on some sleep.
Well, look, thank you. That's all for today. Let us know what you think. Remember, you can WhatsApp voice notes us on 07934 200 444. Send an email to electoral dysfunction at sky.uk. Thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.